All right, folks, thank you very much. A lot of people have registered for tonight's webinar, but we'll start up now. We will be sending out at the end of this event the recording and the slides for everyone who registered, whether they attended or not. But we thank you for joining with us on a beautiful evening. So tonight's webinar is called Truth to Power. Increasingly over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of misinformation and disinformation about clean energy and fossil fuels, and it's really dangerous. To define terms, misinformation is if you think you read something or heard something from a friend or whatever that's incorrect, and you spread that in some way to another person on Facebook or at a barbecue, and it's false information, but you didn't know that. That's what we call misinformation, and there's a lot of that. But usually the misinformation is driven or spurred on or sparked by disinformation, and that is the deliberate spreading of falsehoods. And we have seen across the spectrum of energy issues that the disinformation is becoming incredibly cost effective. The fossil fuel industry, and sometimes utilities, and sometimes politicians, if you can believe that, will spread disinformation on purpose in the hopes that misinformation will then take it from there, and it'll be multiplied in its effect. And we've kind of had it with that here at Green Energy Consumers Alliance, because we know that clean energy is better all around for society. It's affordable, it's healthy, it creates good jobs and choices for consumers. And that's the truth. We're going to tell the story tonight. We're going to try to point out the misinformation, disinformation, and talk to you about some of the truths, just so you can be better prepared when you're at a barbecue or you're posting something on Facebook or you see something on Facebook. But if you're here, you're probably 95% of you are probably on the same page as we are. But here we are. We're trying to empower you with some information. Next slide, please. So here we are, Green Energy Consumers Alliance. That's a great group of board and staff. We're a nonprofit organization. If you didn't know, we're based in Massachusetts and Rhode Island with offices in Boston and Providence. And we have a mission, and every word here is important to us, to empower consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. Next slide, please. So here we are. I have brought to you a panel of the best and brightest in me, and we're going to have Anna Vanderspeck, our electric vehicle program director, Amanda Barker, our clean energy program coordinator, Carrie Catan is our Massachusetts policy advocate, and Tina Munter, our Rhode Island policy advocate. That seems to be cut off on my screen, but we're all here, and our email addresses are there. Depending upon what we say, you can contact any one of us. First name at greenenergyconsumers.org. Next slide. So the basics, sorry, but you're going to be muted throughout the webinar. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation. Use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask the questions, and we'll look at those at the end. We'll take them at the end. If you'd like to use closed captions, you can click CC at the bottom of your screen. And again, we'll send the slides and recording to you after the webinar. Next slide. So today's agenda. I've already explained the difference between disinformation and misinformation, but now we're going to get into specifics. Offshore wind, electric vehicles, energy cost in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And then we've got a special action alert. I wonder what that is. We'll get into that at the end. And then we're going to open it up for questions. Now, I've got some of the smartest people in the world on energy issues, and we're going to take them one at a time. But then there's an opportunity for staff to buzz in if they want to add something to what one of their colleagues has said. So we'll kick it off with a discussion about offshore wind. Amanda, is there a lot of misinformation and disinformation about offshore wind?
There certainly is, which is what I will be talking to you all about tonight. So, first, I want to just explain why offshore wind is so critical to New England. We often hear people say that they want renewable energy and they want to do something about climate change, but there are better ways to meet our energy needs than offshore wind. And I want to very clearly say that that is not true. Um, this graphic on the right is from a Brada report on New England's total clean energy potential. And it found that offshore wind makes up over half of all the renewable energy available to harness across New England. And it really makes the most sense for our region of all of the clean energy sources. We have extremely high demand along our coasts. We have some of the strongest winds in the entire world right off of our coasts. And we also have shallow waters, which is ideal for turbine installation. So offshore wind is really, without question, the biggest lever that we can pull to decarbonize our electricity here in New England. Next slide. So now to get into some of the disinformation that we've been hearing about offshore wind. Currently, Rhode Island and Massachusetts are working to get their first large-scale offshore wind projects over the finish line. That's Vineyard Wind and Revolution Wind. And unfortunately, fossil fuel interests are working behind the scenes to push back. We have seen several so-called local offshore wind opposition groups pop up, often repeating talking points from the fossil fuel industry. These groups use emotional narratives about whales and fisheries while ignoring the impact of oil and gas extraction on marine life. So we want to encourage you to be really mindful about what you're hearing and where the information is coming from. So we've provided a list of helpful resources if you're interested in learning more on how to combat disinformation and misinformation. This first resource is Against the Wind. It's a report by the Brown Climate and Development Lab. And in it, there's a great map showing how some local anti-wind groups are actually connected to conservative think tanks that are fueled by the fossil fuel industry. The second resource, Real Offshore Wind, is a really helpful website where scientists and academics answer frequently asked questions about offshore wind. False Rumors in the Wind is a great article that addresses disinformation being spread by offshore wind opponents. What's Up with Offshore Wind webinar series is a great three-part webinar put on by the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition. And it really goes into depth on disinformation and how to best address disinformation. Then I also linked a article from the Providence Journal that explains that scientists have found absolutely no link between offshore wind and whale deaths. And then lastly, just today, there was an op-ed posted by the Dean of Brown University's School of Public Health, pointing out that local clean energy is crucial for improving public health. And in this op-ed, they talked about how in Massachusetts, more than 95% of air pollution comes from the burning of fossil fuels. And so a shift to 100% clean electricity, as well as electric vehicles, which my colleague Anna will talk to you all about in a second, um, that shift could really save Massachusetts $14.7 billion in health costs. It could prevent over 28,000 asthma attacks and avoid 1,350 premature deaths over a 30-year period. So this really is not just about combating climate change. It's about public health. It's about jobs. It's about improving the local economy. There are really so many benefits. The list goes on and on of all the benefits that offshore wind can bring to our region and to our states.
But Amanda, if there's no link between whale deaths and offshore wind, why are some people saying that there are links between them? Do you think?
We are finding that that is a fossil fuel industry talking point that is intentionally being spread. That is a clear example of disinformation that local groups are picking up and using to try and combat offshore wind from being developed.
Okay, that's bad. Go ahead.
So I want to tell you what the science actually says. So again, there is no evidence linking offshore wind to whale deaths. Marine scientists have debunked that. Um, I also want to say that organizations like the National Wildlife Federation, oceanographers at the University of Rhode Island, and lifelong marine scientists all support offshore wind because they recognize that climate change is the biggest threat to marine life. Studies have also shown that offshore wind can actually benefit marine life. Turbines can act as artificial reefs, which are shown in these images here, where they can actually create habitat for fish and other marine life. And studies have shown that there's actually a higher abundance of fish near wind farms compared to surrounding areas. And, I've heard from recreational fishermen in Rhode Island that they actually go right up to the Black Island Wind Farm and fish right off the side of the turbines because they know that fish have taken up habitat in that structure there, and they're more likely to catch fish right off the side of the turbine. So with that, I just really want to underscore that saying no to offshore wind is saying yes to more natural gas plants polluting the air we breathe. It's saying yes to more gas pipelines, and it's saying yes to the catastrophic impacts of climate change, which includes warming oceans and acidification that have a profound impact on marine life. So offshore wind is really the biggest lever that we can pull to mitigate climate change and to protect marine life in the process. So with that, I will pass it off to my colleague Anna to talk to you all about electric vehicle misinformation.
Thanks, Amanda. So I am coming with two sort of the top misconceptions that we run into when we are out hosting events and talking to people about electric vehicles at Earth Day fairs or community events all across the state. And the first one that we hear a lot is that electric vehicles are just as dirty as gas-powered cars, either because there's so much coal on our grid or because the battery manufacturing takes so much energy. And so the one graphic that I can use to dispel this is this resource from the Union of Concerned Scientists that looks at the life cycle emissions, so from cradle to grave, of gasoline cars versus electric cars and gasoline trucks versus electric trucks. So I'm just going to walk us through this graphic. So the first thing you'll notice is that each one of these bars has an orange slice, and that orange slice is the manufacturing of the vehicle. So these are the greenhouse gas emissions that are the result of the manufacturing of the vehicle. And you can see if you kind of squint that the manufacturing emissions of the vehicle are lower for electric vehicles compared to their gas counterparts. But electric vehicles have an additional slice, which is the blue slice, and that is the greenhouse gas emissions from the manufacturing of the battery. Manufacturing a battery is an energy-intensive process, so the greenhouse gas emissions up front for manufacturing a new gas car or a new new gas car or new gas truck are lower than those of a new electric car or electric truck. But the story obviously does not end there. UCS also looks at the operating emissions of driving those vehicles and what those greenhouse gas emissions look like. So you can see that for each electric vehicle on this graph, the gray bar of the vehicle operation is much smaller for the electric version than the gas. And if you take all of that together for an electric car, UCS found a 52% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions over the life of the vehicle, and for electric trucks, it was a 57% reduction. What I want to stress, though, here is that in New England, we've got a much cleaner grid than the national average, and this analysis was done using a national average. So if you were to do the same analysis with the emissions on the grid in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, that emission would be even starker, or the emissions reduction would be even starker. And if you are in one of the many communities across our two states that has a green municipal aggregation program and you opt up to 100% local renewable energy, that goes all the way down to 0 for the vehicle operation. So myth one is that EVs are really dirty. Truth is they're a lot cleaner than gas vehicles. This segues nicely to our next myth, which is that the grid can't handle electric vehicles. We hear this a lot. There's a lot of news about grid issues all across the country, and people see that and think, oh goodness, we're not prepared for that. But the truth is we can be. So first thing to know is that this transition to electric vehicles is gradual. We're not going to suddenly wake up tomorrow and have everybody drive an electric vehicle. And even when we do have everybody drive an electric vehicle, those electric vehicles don't all plug into the grid at once. In fact, electric vehicles load is considered flexible, which means it's easy to shift. If you need to use a microwave, you want to use that microwave when you need food. So that's not very flexible. You're going to use that microwave when you want to have dinner. But with an EV, it doesn't really matter to you when it charges as long as it's ready to go when you need it to be. And so that means that there's a lot of flexibility in when we actually charge those electric vehicles. And we can shift a lot of the demand from electric vehicles to low demand periods. So right now that means overnight when Amanda makes sure we have lots of offshore wind, that'll be extra excellent because electric vehicles can soak up a lot of the generation from offshore wind overnight when other demand is pretty low. And in some places in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, electric vehicles are already serving as batteries through the Connected Solutions programs from our utilities to help smooth out supply and demand. So basically, they're being called on, like other distributed energy resources, to ramp down charging at moments of peak demand. Electric utilities across both states and state agencies are preparing to meet the demand. They're forecasting out, okay, what is electric vehicle adoption going to look like in the coming years? What does that mean for the investments that we need to make in the grid? In Massachusetts, we've got a couple different entities working on that across state agencies. So we have an Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Coordinating Council. We've had a Grid Modernization Advisory Council and procedures or processes at the Department of Public Utilities and with the energy agency. So this is very top of mind in Massachusetts. In Rhode Island, we're sort of one step behind, but we're getting there. But Rhode Island has been pretty forward thinking and applying for federal funds to build out public charging infrastructure, knowing that there is this demand. But the good news is, again, this is a gradual transition. We've got time to prepare and the relevant entities are working on it. And then lastly, if I were allowed more time, I would have more to say on this, but electric vehicles exert a downward pressure on electricity rates, which means when you look at states all across the country and you look at how much revenue electric vehicle drivers have paid into the electric grid over time versus the costs that they have basically caused by requiring new service or electric vehicle charging stations, that new revenue really exceeds the costs. And this is true in California, where EV adoption is way ahead than Massachusetts and Rhode Island. But it's also true in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Synapse Energy Economics has put out a couple studies where they show you revenue costs, net revenue. And that is a good news story that is not told enough. A lot of people, when they hear electric vehicles and the grid, they think of only the costs, but the benefits far outweigh them even before we think about greenhouse gas emission reduction or public health. So truth on this point is that EVs can help stabilize the grid. We've got time to prepare, and there's a lot of work in motion. So with that, I will pass it right along. Oh,
And I have a question. Some countries have much greater EV adoption than Massachusetts and Rhode Island. As far as you know, Norway and the Netherlands and China or California, those jurisdictions that have a lot of EV adoption, is their grid broken as a result of all those EVs?
Not yet. No, I shouldn't say not yet. No, it's not. No, it's not. And the exciting thing that I could also talk about with electric vehicles looking forward is that electric vehicles are giant batteries on wheels, and there are cool pilot programs now of those vehicles discharging electricity back onto the grid in moments of peak demand that we're going to hopefully see more and more of. The Massachusetts Clean Energy Center has a really cool pilot program on that right now. But that is yet another way where EVs can actually serve as a tool to protect the grid moving forward, especially given all the extreme weather events and everything else that we're looking forward to in the next couple of years.
On that last couple of points about the grid, Amanda does, along with Loie Hayes, does webinars about heat pumps. Amanda, are you also hearing that some people worry that the heat pumps are gonna break the grid too? Have you heard that?
We certainly have heard that, and that is not a concern, at least in the immediate future, because right now we have a summer peaking grid where we have enough electricity to supply us when it's really hot and everyone has their ACs on. And so we're essentially just going to shift to a winter peaking grid. But if we have the electricity to be able to supply all of those ACs in the summer, we should have that same electricity to be able to supply heat pumps to heat people's homes in the wintertime.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, we don't, as an organization, we don't want to discourage consumers from asking a question if they're wondering about uh, the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. If they sincerely don't know and they want to know, that we do want to encourage people to ask questions. What we're concerned about is when um, is the spread of misinformation and disinformation. So, okay, next slide. I think we're moving on to Carrie. Okay, this is relates to what we were just talking about. So go ahead.
Yes, it does. So my name's Carrie Gatan. I do a lot of our Massachusetts building policy work. And so I've definitely heard a lot of misinformation when it comes to this, especially even coming from like there was one study that was put out by a group affiliated with MIT that was technically very sound, but they made a lot of very strange assumptions, and they came out with this result of, oh, it's way too expensive to build all electric unless you take away the odd assumptions they make, like they assumed that building all electric still involved hooking up a gas furnace for some reason, which added a few $1,000s in cost. But that's actually just a side note about disinformation in buildings. One really common thing that is heard is it is just too expensive. We cannot electrify all of the homes across the Commonwealth or in Rhode Island. We are going to be using fossil fuels forever. And the honest answer is it actually varies a lot in how much it costs to decarbonize a home. There will be homes where if you switch out their central AC with a heat pump, you have decarbonized that home and it's incredibly cheap. There will be homes that it requires a lot more work. Fortunately, the technologies, heat pump technologies are getting considerably better. And one area where I think the technology is getting really exciting is window-mounted heat pumps that kind of just go in like an AC, but they're a bit beefier and they can handle heating your home in the summer, in the winter. Um, and I think that is really excited because there's always been some homes where they need a lot of really fundamental work to use regular heat pumps, but a window-mounted unit, suddenly you don't have to care about the fact that the wall is old or it was built in like 1804 and all of the unique challenges that come from an old housing stock. You can just put something into the window like, many homes have been doing for decades. Another thing that's really worth noting is electric heat pumps can beat delivered fuels, so propane and oil, when it comes to price pretty consistently in New England now. And they're getting more competitive with gas costs, partly for reasons we're going to head into in a second. And yeah, as Amanda mentioned before, New England currently is a summer peaking electric grid. So we can add a lot more heat pumps for a while without necessarily overwhelming the grid. Now, it will be a challenge once we do become a winter peaking grid, just because compared to something like EVs, the amount of power it takes to heat homes across the region on those really cold days can be pretty considerable. But in this, we are kind of helped out by the fact that the utilities are already building infrastructure in preparation for that demand, in part because utilities in New England, at least the big investor-owned ones like Rhode Island Energy, National Grid, Eversource, they don't really make their money selling electricity. They really make their money building the infrastructure to get the electricity to your house, which in this case helps us because they're looking at increased electric loads in the future, and they are very excited to build all the infrastructure necessary to make sure that homes can be heated with electricity because it is within their best interests. Next slide. Now, there is also I mentioned utility incentives before, so we can also talk about what's happening on the gas side. There is a narrative going around that it is energy efficiency, so, partly Mass Save in Massachusetts, and a lack of pipelines that is making gas more expensive. And the reality of it is that's actually not what's happening. Um, there's a few different things that have kind of contributed to the fact that natural gas heating is much more expensive than it used to be even fairly recently. One of those is about a decade ago, there was a large explosion in California, and that incentivized a national movement for more fixing of gas infrastructure. So in Massachusetts, we have the GSEP program. Rhode Island has its own version of that. And that basically allowed the gas utilities to spend much more money doing maintenance on their old pipelines than they used to. And that includes stuff like taking out the old steel cast iron pipes, which from a safety perspective is great. From a cost perspective, it is really bad because it is incredibly expensive to remove all of those pipes and replace them with newer pipes. The total costs in Massachusetts are going to be in the tens of billions of dollars if the GSEP, the Gas System Enhancement Program, actually goes on for as long as it's projected to take. And another factor that we're seeing on the gas side kind of happening at the same time is partly because we've had a series of warmer winters before this last one, and partly because more homes are being built all electric, and partly because of the energy efficiency programs that states around here have invested a lot of money in, is that we're actually seeing gas demand either flat or falling. And you'd think that would make gas cheaper, but the way most of the cost of the gas system is maintaining those old gas pipes, especially more now that we're spending more than we used to on maintaining those old gas pipes. And that cost needs to be borne by customers, regardless of how much gas is actually going through the system. So if you're selling 1 million units of gas and it costs you $1 million to do that, you can sell it for $1 per unit of gas. But suddenly, if you're selling 500,000 units of gas, you may save money by having to buy less gas if you're the utility, but all of your maintenance costs are still the same size. So maybe it then costs you, $1.25 per unit of gas in order to heat everyone's homes. And that's what we're seeing, especially in parts of Massachusetts, where these gas utilities are spending more money than they ever have before, but they're also getting less customers paying into the system. And then they also have other costs like utilities will subsidize new gas hookups, something that is currently before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities and something we are arguing against. Because obviously, from an energy affordability point of view, it is quite bad that all of these gas utilities are spending a lot of money. At the same time, they're having less customers than ever, because that does mean that they're kind of locked into having to charge higher prices just to continue being financially operational. And we could enter a scenario where if it becomes cheaper for everyone to, double down on energy efficiency or switch to electric heat pumps or, do whatever it takes to use less gas because gas has just become so expensive, that kind of starts feeding into a doom loop where there's ever less customers, but there's still maintenance costs that need to be paid. So the gas utilities have to increase rates. And I mean, that is something that is a real problem that we could be facing. And that is something where if we just make another gas pipeline going down to Pennsylvania, it would not solve the fundamental problems that we face. In fact, Massachusetts, I know New England has more capacity to import gas than we actually have been over the last couple of winters, because we do have a big liquefied natural gas terminal where we can import gas from anywhere on the globe in actually only a couple miles from where I live in Everett. And we've barely been using that big piece of infrastructure, despite the fact that Massachusetts gas customers have been paying for it in their bills, because there just hasn't been enough demand to really need to use it. So building another pipeline would not actually bring down the cost of gas, despite what I think some fossil fuel interests are kind of trying to convince people of.
So, Carrie, bottom line here is that some people are thinking that gas is cheap and bills are high because of clean energy, is what the narrative that we've been hearing. And I guess you're trying to say that the prognosis or the future for gas is iffy, right? It looks like gas could go up in price over time, right?
Yeah, this is definitely all more, what I'm saying is more true for the distributing gas to like individuals' homes through their gas utilities. This doesn't necessarily impact natural gas power plants. Those are kind of two different, for lack of a better term, like economic systems where one can be doing really bad and the other one can be fine. They're not entirely connected,
Yeah.
but at least on the building side, the sheer cost of maintaining all of the gas pipes to everyone's homes really requires a lot of people to be buying gas. And if that stops being true, gas just has to become more expensive.
Now, a lot of we've read and heard a lot of consumers think that the new pipelines would help reduce the cost. Can you just the gas utilities are they willing to build those pipelines with money from shareholders, or are they looking to ratepayers for that?
Yeah, that's kind of the one big issue with the idea of let's build another pipeline is, well, someone is going to have to pay for it. And if it's going in to meet the needs of gas utility customers, then it would be gas utility customers. So you could see your bill increase for this piece of infrastructure, which to be blunt, really isn't needed. New England has historically been pretty gas constrained. Like we haven't been able to get as much gas um, in New England as we would like from like the big shale producing areas in Pennsylvania because there hasn't been that many pipelines. But we've also been fairly good at adapting to that. A lot of power plants switch from gas to oil, which means that we can kind of live with the gas capacity that we have. And as I said before, we have the ability to bring in massive amounts of natural gas from out of the country by sea through the Everett Marine Terminal. And we really haven't been doing that. So the idea that we need a new pipeline is a bit like saying we need a second car, even if we're just one person. It's not quite clear what it would even be used for.
All right. Now, Tina is our Rhode Island policy advocate. We've got Carrie in Massachusetts and Tina in Rhode Island. They do a great job talking to legislators and the executive branch, but you're hearing similar things in Rhode Island, I think. Tina, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, thank you, Larry. And I want to preface by saying my next two slides utilize examples that I've seen in Rhode Island, but many of the themes, similar to what Carrie had just touched on, are applicable to both states. So in this first slide, the image you see came from Rhode Island's Energy Efficiency Council and details some of the many benefits of energy efficiency and the benefits that we as ratepayers, if you have Rhode Island Energy as your utility, are paying for. One of the main points is that energy efficiency can lower utility costs by reducing the total amount of electricity that we need to purchase, because if you weatherize your home or you increase, the insulation in your home or the insulation in your attic, the units of fuel that you're using or the units of electricity that you're using to heat your home or cool your home can be used more efficiently, and you don't need to use as much or buy as much to heat your home or to cool your home. I also want to note this big takeaway in the middle that for about every $1 invested into energy efficiency, that results in $3 of benefits to Rhode Islanders. And related to that point, energy efficiency has benefits outside of just that monetary value or reduced greenhouse gas emissions, but energy efficiency also has big public health benefits. For example, if someone were to install a heat pump in their home, they would be using a highly efficient electric appliance, But because they're using an electric appliance and can get rid of their fossil fuel burning appliance, they're no longer combusting a fuel in their home, and their indoor air quality can be improved, which improves the health of the occupants of that dwelling. I also want to note that for a greater public health benefit, installing a heat pump, say my colleague Carrie installs a heat pump, even though she in her own home is no longer combusting fossil fuels, the outdoor air quality improves as well, and her neighbors can also experience improved air quality and those benefits of energy efficiency. So while one person may be installing an energy efficiency or an electrification measure, those benefits are not just felt by that one person, they're felt by many other people. And when that's expanded across states or across societies, that leads to many more sizable benefits. My next slide, I want to outline clean energy costs and what we've been seeing with clean energy costs on utility bills. So this slide has used data from Rhode Island Energy's proposed rate change from a docket that was in front of Rhode Island's Public Utilities Commission earlier this spring. And the rows highlighted in green are clean energy investments, and the rows highlighted in orange are the largest bill contributors on the average residential ratepayer bill. And this would be for a residential customer utilizing 500 kilowatt hours of electricity per month. So this past winter, we've seen a lot of concern about the high utility bills that ratepayers are facing. And there at times has been an emphasis or even a blame placed on clean energy spending or clean energy public policy measures as what's created that cost burden. But the truth is that by investing in energy efficiency and by investing in clean energy, we can drive down reliance on fossil fuels, particularly volatile fossil fuel prices. And if you look at the rows highlighted both in green and orange, you can see that those clean energy programs in green are quite a small overall percentage and overall dollar amount on a monthly utility bill, whereas those orange charges are both the largest dollar amount and the largest percentage contributor to utility bills. So when there's this emphasis placed on clean energy spending as the reason for why customer bills are so high, that is not, the entire story. We really need to look at the entire bill as, one piece that ratepayers are paying for and not pick out individual policies and how those are impacting people, especially as utility costs and electric costs vary per season from winter to summer for Rhode Island Energy last resort customers and can vary more frequently for ratepayers that utilize a community aggregation program or a third-party supplier.
Tina, could I stop you for 1 second? This is sort of a moment, a teachable moment here, which is the reason we were showing this. We calculated that the clean energy spending increased 2.6%, but we observed that a TV reporter in Rhode Island went on live on TV and was asking, I think, a legislator why clean energy spending was going up 43%. And so if you look at the top row in green, one of the programs went up 43%, but it's a small program, and the reporter ignored the other clean energy programs. So we did the math, and it wasn't, the total of them only increased by 2.6%. So that's an example. I don't think the reporter was trying to spread disinformation, but the caution we have for everybody tonight is even the media can make mistakes, believe it or not. And we if we see a mistake, we need to try to call them out on it. And so we wrote a blog about that. And we caution you. We don't want to say that it's, fake news. It was not good reporting though. And if you're in Rhode Island and you hear at a barbecue that clean energy spending went up 43%, someone maybe saw that on TV and just thinks that it's gospel, and we know that it's not. So,
Larry, if I could add on to your point, I just want to highlight as well that while it's true that that renewable energy growth charge increased by 43%, when you look at the dollar value of that charge, it only increased from $4.02 to about $5.75. And that renewable energy growth charge is a fixed charge on Rhode Island Energy Last Resort Service electric bills, meaning that charge will not fluctuate with your monthly usage. So if you use more than 500 kilowatt hours or less, that dollar value will not go up or go down. And, while we don't want to, not show that utility costs and affordability is the problem, because we definitely see that affordability can be difficult in certain times. We want to highlight that clean energy spending is a prudent and good investment that helps Rhode Islanders and helps us meet our climate goals and can drive economic growth.
Correct. Yes, we'll come back to that. Thank you, Tina. You want to go to the next slide? Just want to point out that one of the groups that we work closely with is the Alliance for Climate Transition, and they have a web page dedicated to resources about misinformation. So if you want another look at what another organization is saying about this, they're doing the same thing we're trying to do tonight. So that's a resource that you might want to take a peek at. Next slide. We have a lot of really cool events as an organization in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We've got May 6th, Anna's doing electric vehicle charging at home. May 10th, 19th, and June 4th, we've got events in Rhode Island. Solar Tour, Wind Turbine Tour, our spring meeting on May 19th in Providence at a beautiful location. Anna again on June 11th, electric vehicle charging on the go. June 26th, more Anna, is a used EV right for you? Not just Anna, but also Caroline. And you can we keep adding events, so go to our webpage and you can learn about those. Next slide. Oh, we are a nonprofit organization and we do a great job. You just heard 4 outstanding speakers talk about misinformation, disinformation. They're experts on all these things, but I have to pay them. And so if you could donate, it's tax deductible, and I would appreciate it, and I think they would too. But more importantly, this helps achieve our mission, where we are trying to speed a just transition, and we do it through a combination of programs and advocacy. It's my job to ask. Next slide. Now, Anna, there's something big happening. Could you explain what's happening and how people can help?
Yes, this right here is an example of misinformation and disinformation in action. So Massachusetts and Rhode Island have both adopted a series of regulations out of California. So California writes regulations. Other states have the ability to adopt those regulations that have to do with vehicle efficiency and emissions. And there is a nationwide effort, mostly funded by automakers and the fossil fuel lobby, to undo those regulations. So you may have heard news on the federal level that there are several simultaneous attempts, both in Congress and in the courts, to basically undo the part of the Clean Air Act that allows states like California, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island to have these regulations in the first place. And so you might have heard about tomorrow, the House of Representatives federally will be voting on a Congressional Review Act of these waivers. The Supreme Court is hearing a case that has to do with this, but we're not talking about federal stuff today, we're talking about state stuff. So just as there's a campaign focused at the federal government, governors across the country are under a lot of pressure from those same actors to delay these regulations. So the key ones that we're talking about today are called Advanced Clean Cars 2. They require automakers to slowly ramp up the percentage of new vehicles that they sell in Massachusetts and Rhode Island as electric over time. So it's a gradual transition. There's lots of flexibilities built in to make it possible for automakers to comply, but governors, again, are under a lot of pressure to delay. So we are having a somewhat emergency webinar tomorrow. We'll be joined by the Natural Resources Defense Council, an organization called Green Latinos, and the Union of Concerned Scientists, and we'll talk about what the heck is ACC2, Why is it so critical for climate and public health? What is happening? How is it under attack at the federal and state level? And how do we take action? And so right now, the big call to action is in Massachusetts to call Governor Healy and ask her to stand strong in the face of all the pressure that states are under to delay. In Rhode Island right now, there's a little bit less pressure because Rhode Island isn't starting implementation this year anyway. Rhode Island's sort of 1 year behind, so there isn't a lot of pressure there yet. But in Massachusetts, there certainly is. So please join us on Thursday. We'll talk about all this, and then we'll actually just take 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for everybody to email and or call Governor Healy's office. So hope you can join us on Thursday.
Anna, we can send information about how they can contact the governor with the follow-up to this as well.
Yes, and I will also put it in the chat.
Very good. Thank you. All right, next slide, please, Tina. Questions, here we are. All right, so got some questions. We'll spread them around. Amanda, somebody asked about maintenance cost on wind and solar. Comparing that to the maintenance of gas pipelines and fossil fuel facilities. Are wind and solar expensive to maintain?
So I would say, first of all, that operation and maintenance costs for wind and solar are factored into the fixed price that developers contract with the state. So offshore wind and solar are developed at a fixed price through what's called a power purchase agreement, which sets the rate that we're going to be paying for their energy over 20 to 30 years, or however long the contract is for. So it's already kind of shown when they bid that price. I'll also add that wind and solar systems are able to generate electricity without burning fuel. So, there's no need for procuring the fuel and the delivery infrastructure for the fuel. We don't have to figure out where we're going to store the fuel on site. We don't need the systems for combusting the fuel. So I think overall, offshore wind and solar don't have the same level of, operations and maintenance costs that fossil fuels do. Very good.
Anna, here's one for you. When we talk about the life cycle of a car, does that include of an electric car? Does that include the disposal of the electric battery?
The particular resource that we pointed to from the Union of Concerned Scientists, who are the science people who did that analysis, does not include disposal. However, there's really exciting developments on that front. So a lot of people are really concerned about the end of life of electric vehicle batteries. But the good news is that when a battery is no longer fit to be used in an electric vehicle, if the overall sort of capacity has decreased a certain amount in year 15 or whatever of the vehicle's life, it still has enough charge to be used as stationary storage. So there are examples already and have been for years of different types of entities using used electric vehicle batteries for either backup power or to basically serve as grid storage to balance out supply and demand, either for the grid or for particular sites that draw a lot of power and want to reduce their demand overall. So point one is you can reuse the batteries. Point two is you can recycle the batteries. So all of the batteries that we're talking about today or in the market right now are lithium-ion batteries, and they all have lots of metals and minerals in them that have a lot of value. So it's unlikely that at the end of a life of a vehicle or at the end of the battery's life, that those are just going to get chucked in a landfill somewhere because people can make money from recycling them. So there are several companies that have come into force in the last couple of years that are working with automakers to make that a more closed loop so that automakers can take recycled minerals from used batteries and build them into new batteries. One company in particular is called Redwood Materials, but there's lots more. The Inflation Reduction Act put a lot of support into this space, which is one of the many reasons why we are really concerned about any potential rollbacks at the federal level. But the industry as a whole is looking into recycling in a big way, which is exciting, but definitely something we'll need to keep an eye on for sure.
Very good. Question. A few of you are going to answer this one. I'll start with Amanda. Is there a discussion about promoting geothermal heat pumps? We've been talking mostly about air source heat pumps, but how about geothermal?
I think that geothermal is definitely going to be a key piece of the puzzle. It is a very efficient heating source, even more efficient than air source heat pumps, which are already very efficient. I think there are some pilots happening in Massachusetts, which maybe Carrie can say more about.
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of worth breaking geothermal into just two different categories. There is like the single household, single pump geothermal systems, which have been around for a while. Those are great. They are more expensive to build up front, but you do get savings on them because they are more efficient. They use less electricity. And importantly, when we're talking about stress to the electric grid, they are the most efficient compared to air source heat pumps when it is coldest out, which means they deliver savings right at the point where the value of electricity is highest, which makes them very useful from an energy standpoint. Um, there's some incentives for those, I think through Mass Save, and I think probably through the Rhode Island equivalent as well. I think one challenging thing is the utilities are less enthusiastic about these single air source heat pump, ground source heat pumps because they don't own them, and they also use less electricity, which means the utilities don't get to build as much infrastructure as they would like to because that's how they make money. So I think that's kind of one area holding it, like the high cost and the fact that it's not in the utilities' interest to promote them are two things holding them back. But it is a developed and really cool technology with some major companies involved in installing heat pumps across the area. As far as like there's also the newer network geothermal systems, which there are two sorry, I keep saying that. There's one pilot happening right now in Massachusetts that's currently built. And what it is, it's basically a lot of geothermal heat pumps all connected together that kind of share heat from one another. So if you have like an ice rink that needs to pump out a lot of coldness, you can do that into the system, and then it can be taken up by maybe a house that's trying to air condition itself. That can be even more efficient than single ground source heat pumps because buildings are kind of sharing the energy load. And the utilities are more interested in this concept because they are interested in the idea that they would build this and that it could, in theory, kind of be a system that replaces the gas system for them. And by that, I mean like a massive piece of infrastructure that people use to heat their homes that's both cost effective for the customer, so people want to connect to it, and is really big and expensive to build, which means the utilities would be allowed to charge a lot of money in order to like be paid back for the money that because they're always incentivized to spend more money, and this is something they would get to spend more money on. So they are really interested in this idea as sometimes sort of maybe a way that they could get away from gas when they are in a mood to acknowledge that's actually something they're going to have to do, which is not something they're consistent about.
And I'll just add on for some additional information in Rhode Island. We have colleagues at the advocacy organization Climate Jobs Rhode Island that are supporting a bill in the Rhode Island House. It's Bill 5576, the Thermal Energy Networks and Jobs Act, which would direct our public utility, Rhode Island Energy, to maximize investments in thermal energy networks or district geothermal when it's in the public interest. And Rhode Island also has a future of gas study or a future of gas docket that's open at our Public Utilities Commission, exploring the future of the gas regulated distribution system in light of our Act on Climate. And when that final report comes out, perhaps in May, we're hoping that that will also explore geothermal and what Rhode Island can do to explore that as an option to help meet our climate goals.
Thank you. We're getting close to wrapping up. Lisa puts in the Q&A that reminder that we still have the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, which offers a lot of tax credits for clean energy. But for geothermal, it's a very generous tax credit. It's 30% on the entire cost of a ground source heat pump or geothermal. It's 30% for an air source heat pump, but only up to $2,000, and which is still pretty good. But for the ground source heat pump, if you do that, it makes it it can be very competitive with fossil fuels. So now I get a question I'm going to ask everyone to answer. Question is, should we be more proactive in setting the narrative about the benefits of clean energy, or are we reacting to this anti-wind, anti-EV, anti-heat pump stuff? Or are we should we not be talking about disinformation and misinformation, or should we just be talking about benefits? I'll go in order. Anna.
I was not expecting to be first in order. I think this is a really tricky balance, and I think it's something I personally think about a lot. I've learned from our excellent marketing team that if you repeat a myth, even if you repeat it just for the purpose of showing that it is a myth, it solidifies in people's minds. So I try to both keep that in mind and really stress the benefits and just talk about what we know is true, but also acknowledge that some level of education about like what is misinformation versus what is disinformation, who are the forces behind the myths that we do here, is also motivating. So those are sort of two slightly opposing instincts, but I try to balance those two. So when we're out at electric vehicle events or talking to legislators, we'll talk about the positives. You'll see at the webinar on Thursday about Advanced Clean Cars 2, it's a webinar about why we need it and how excellent it is, and how it will help our economy and public health and our climate missions, all that. That's really the focus and the thrust of that webinar, even though maybe the timing of it is a response to a lot of the misconceptions and disinformation that are floating around, particularly right now. So I hope that answered the question.
It does. Carrie, should we be saying that clean energy is good, or should we be saying it's not bad?
So this actually goes back to the first campaign I was ever involved with in politics, which was a ballot initiative on transgender rights. And the thing we had to talk to people about at the doors, because I was obviously arguing for transgender rights, was bathrooms, because that's what people cared about. That's what everyone was concerned about. And we knew that's what the opposition was going to scare people about closer to the election. So we talked about this issue. We talked about the facts around it. We educated folks. We even showed people like a kind of video that the opposition had used in an earlier campaign in Houston, and then had a conversation with voters about why the video and the fear-mongering didn't actually make any logical sense. And that was really effective. And, that ballot initiative, we defeated the ballot initiative. Confusingly, we were the Yes campaign, but we won in 2018, so it doesn't matter that was confusing. And I think that really goes to, you have to talk to people where you're at, even if you'd rather be talking about other things. It's important to acknowledge what your opposition is going to throw at you, because if you can respond effectively, you can beat it, even if they come up with very emotional, very impactful nonsense. As long as you take the time to point out that it is nonsense, you can win, which is something I very much believe in.
Very good. Amanda, are there benefits to wind turbines other than the fact that they don't kill whales?
There certainly are, yes. And I think both Anna and Carrie answered this question well in that, we definitely need to be telling the positive story of, in my case, offshore wind and, really keeping all of the benefits at the top of the news cycle. But with that being said, I think that the misinformation has been repeated so much, like that offshore wind supposedly kills whales, that if we don't respond to that, they're going to think that we don't have an answer. So I do agree that, we should largely keep it positive, but I think we also need to respond to some of the common myths that we're seeing, such as the whales one. And we need to clearly state that that is not true and call that out.
Yeah. Now, Tina, you are our interviewer on our podcast. Do you want to talk about the podcast before you break?
Yes, I would love to. So, Green Energy Consumers Alliance has a new podcast. It's called Consumers for Climate. And we recently launched at the end of this winter, but we've started with just giving overviews of that podcast with several of our fellow staff members here at Green Energy Consumers Alliance, focusing on some of our main topics. And in that, we both addressed commonly asked questions or things that we've heard that we'd like to go into more depth about. So, for example, with Anna, we did a Transportation 101 focusing on electric vehicles, and we went into questions about charging, where to charge, how to fund an electric vehicle, what's available for people that are interested in potentially purchasing or leasing an electric vehicle. And those are great short resources if folks are interested in any of our topics. My colleague Amanda did one on offshore wind. Carrie did one on Massachusetts policy. One of our other colleagues, Loie, did a great one on heat pumps and energy efficient fisheries. And you can look to that on our website as just another resource that will help you navigate clean energy technology or understand a little bit more questions that come up at family barbecues and help you understand what the truth is on some of these big topics.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank our guest for coming tonight, and we appreciate the comments. Rob loves the podcast. Which one was the best, Rob? Was it the one I did? I wonder. Maybe not. But I want to thank Anna, Carrie, Amanda, and Tina. They do a great job every day, but in particular for the last hour. So watch everybody for your email. We will send you the slides, the recording, and some other information as well. Have a good night.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, all.
Quick intro to Green Energy Consumers Alliance. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with us, we are a nonprofit organization based in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And our mission is to empower consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. That's a lot of words, but basically what we do is we run a series of programs and services that help people access various clean energy technologies. One of those programs is called Drive Green, where we talk about electric vehicles and make sure people have answers to their questions about charging and road trips and batteries and incentives and all that. But we also do public policy advocacy work at the state level, both in the transportation sector, but also other clean energy sectors. So we spend a lot of time talking about electric vehicles and infrastructure in the climate context, but today we're excited to talk about it in the public health context. We will be joined today by 3 speakers. I will have Dan introduce himself and then Alyssa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Fitzgerald. I use he, him pronouns. I work with the American Lung Association. I oversee our mission impact work in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, including our advocacy and state public policy. I look forward to talking about some of our research on the topic. Thanks for having me.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa Benalfiu Ramos. I use she, hers pronouns. I'm the Chief of Policy at the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, or BECMA for short. We do statewide advocacy related to the racial wealth gap, and I'm excited to talk about EVs and public health today because obviously promoting EVs and clean energy is part of our public policy priorities, and my background's in public health, so this is a merging of 2 of my interests.
We are very glad that you're here. And oh, you're here. Ezra, go ahead, introduce yourself.
I'm Ezra Cohen. I'm a pediatrician at BMC. I also do pediatric rheumatology. I take care of kids primarily in an urban setting and drive. Our household has two EVs, so I feel very passionately about this subject, and I at firsthand see a lot of the impact that environmental policies have on kids' health.
And you're calling in from BMC, I see. So I'm very extra grateful that you're here and that you got here so early. I was worried you wouldn't be here in time.
No. Good.
And then everybody, sorry. My name is Anna van der Speck. I'm our electric vehicle program director here at Green Energy Consumers. But this presentation today is broken up into a couple of sections. We will start with the public health impacts of gas and diesel vehicles. Then we'll talk about the relative pollution impacts of electric vehicles versus gas and internal combustion engines. And then we'll round it out with a sort of vision of what the future could look like in terms of public health in an electrified future. And then we'll, again, have plenty of time for Q&A and discussion. I will stress that we talk about the greenhouse gas emission impacts of EVs all the time. And if you're interested in that, we've got lots of webinars and slides for you. But today, we're really going to hone in on public health. So I will go ahead and get us started by turning the mic over to Ezra.
That's great. So gas and diesel vehicles have a lot of negative impacts, and those impacts disproportionately affect children and the elderly, as you might expect. So when you burn diesel and gasoline, it generates very fine particles. They're all different sizes, but they're classified into the ones that have the biggest health impacts are classified into particulate matter 2.5 and ultrafine particles. And you can see that basically, depending on the dimensions of the particle, they penetrate more deeply into the lungs. This is sort of logical. The lungs get smaller and smaller as they branch. And the reason they get smaller and smaller is so that the air sacs, the alveoli at the very, very end are interfacing with tiny little blood vessels called capillaries so that they can seamlessly transfer oxygen and carbon dioxide into our blood. So very fine particles you've heard probably of problems with or may have with talc and silica and other things that are very, very fine can cause the biggest problems. And these combustion particles can reach all the way into the air sacs, which are absolutely crucial for exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide in the lungs. We know for sure that these products can make asthma worse in kids, and certainly there's a much higher rate of asthma in urban environments. I'm not an expert in asthma, but that is probably due to a lot of reasons. But one big part of it is probably the proximity to traffic and pollution and things like that. And we know in the elderly, in a condition called COPD, which has some similarities to asthma, that also can get worse. And then likewise, the kind of chronic inflammation that's caused by exposure to this particulate matter can increase the risk of infections. You can go to the next slide. So there are other products of gas and diesel combustion that are problematic. Nitrogen oxides are a pollutant that is linked to worsened lung function in a lot of large epidemiologic studies. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. I don't know if you guys have ever been told not to eat bread that's extremely burned, but those are present in anything that's been really combusted, kind of to the end point of combustion. And this might be going a little deeper than people are interested, but basically DNA is stacked like this, and these molecules are also kind of flat stacks or flat shapes, and they can go in between DNA. And then when your body goes around and tries to replicate the DNA like it's doing all the time, it will make an error because you have something sticking out of it that is making the DNA look like it's a different shape. And as a result of that, you get mutations, and most of the time your body repairs those mutations, and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes those mutations lead to cancer. So that's a very obvious progression that you can literally see what it's doing in the DNA and how it causes a clinical disease. And kids concentrate a lot of these things in their body more so than adults because they're developing, so they're internalizing a lot more into their body that's required for growth. They don't have the same defense mechanisms. They take more air per pound. Sorry, I have a little typo there on the next line, but both of these compounds have been associated with similar things as before: preterm birth in pregnant moms, a lot of neurodevelopmental disorders, and cancers, as I mentioned above, and elderly for slightly different reasons, but also because of their defense mechanisms, are also at high risk for exposure to both these things. Sorry, so the next slide, and I think next participant.
Oh, I thought this was you, Ezra, but maybe it's not. Alyssa, is this you?
Wait, the next one you want to show me?
The slide hasn't changed yet.
It hasn't changed, yeah.
That's very
No,
weird.
that is,
It has on my end. How about now?
I can see it now. This actually might be me. I don't know, actually, Alyssa, is this me or you?
This is you. I have a map.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, the best remedies are, there are a lot of potential remedies, but basically anything that reduces the concentration of these things in the air. So basically regulating the air concentrations of the nitrogen oxides and the particulate matter. Greening, meaning a lot, our trees and vegetation do a lot to clean the air. Not just processing greenhouse gases, but doing a lot with particulate matter as well. Filters at school, so that even if the outside environment has a lot of this particulate matter, they're just getting less exposure sort of per minute per day. We've all gotten alerts on our phones when the air quality is poor to stay indoors. And just zoning policies so that roads are not right next to places where people live, highways, schools. And then, of course, the most obvious, which is at the top, is transitioning to cleaner technologies. And those are electric and also the ultra low sulfur diesel is mentioned for trucks and other things.
Thanks, Ezra. I think the points you made about zoning policies are a good transition into Alyssa's part of the presentation, which is all about the disproportionate impacts and the decades of policy decisions that have gotten us to this point.
Hello, everyone, and I'm excited to nerd out about a real public health issue that I'm very concerned about, and also share some information folks might have not known. And thank you, Dr. Cohen, for providing that background on how it affects our bodies. I wanted to provide this map that talks about the particulate matter for 2.5 in particular. That's a little bit of a weird way to say that. Exposure to diesel particulate pollution in Massachusetts. So this map, as you see, is showing the concentration annually of PM 2.5. And you'll see it's near all these major cities, the Boston area, Greater Boston, Lowell, Brockton, New Bedford, Worcester, Springfield. And the lines that you see on this map are the average truck traffic. So it makes sense that we have truck routes that are going directly into major cities. But as you see, that's creating a high level of pollution in specific communities. And so part of what I want to do today is kind of unpack why these truck routes and major roadways are near and in cities and near communities of color, and how that impacts the health of residents in those areas. Next slide, please. So this is a map of Greater Boston. It's kind of been modernized to show what the city looked like in the past and what it looks like now. And what I want to say about this is we all don't experience the harms of these pollutants the same. And we don't experience this equally. And this is because of historic policies like redlining and highway placement. Communities of color are far more likely to live next to high traffic corridors and bus depots. It actually goes back to how these communities were mapped out in the 1930s. Boston, along with most major cities, a lot of major cities, had been literally mapped out by the Federal Home Owners Loan Corporation, who categorized neighborhoods by investment desirability based largely on race and also immigration patterns. So this practice was called redlining and literally graded neighborhoods by color, like took a red pen marker on the map. And neighborhoods that were red and yellow were deemed undesirable, hazardous, and declining, while blue and green were the best and desirable. And obviously, this was by racial lines. And before I move on, I just want to say I live in Boston now, and I used to live in Boston in a different neighborhood. I lived in Eastie, which is in the top right-hand corner of this map. It's that kind of red jutting out area in the top right-hand corner. And when I lived in Eastie, I could see the airport from my bedroom window, and I can feel the vibration from the planes as they were coming into land. If I left my apartment and drove down the street and made a left and made a right, that was the ramp to get on 93 to like go towards the tunnel to come into Boston. If I walked 7 minutes away, that was the Wood Island train station to get on the blue line to go further into the city, and also I could hear the ships. If I did like a 10-minute walk in one direction, there's the port with all those huge, huge ships that bigger than I ever thought possible, were coming to bring, supplies or whatever else happens at the ports. So to think about that level of exposure to so many different things is folks' reality. And East Boston is a community that, has a lot of immigrants from Hispanic countries, Latin America, Central America, South America, as well as, Black people and European immigrants. There's just a lot of immigrants of different backgrounds there. And so think about just kind of what that looks like for all of that to be centered in one neighborhood. Not every neighborhood's like that, but just wanted to give a personal example of what it looks like to experience many pollutants at once. Next slide, please. So in addition to redlining, I also want to speak a little bit more about the creation of highways starting in the mid-1950s and onward. Highways here and around the country and in Massachusetts were a strategy used to prevent integration. So basically, when pushback was occurring about redlining and racialized zoning, folks in power realized that creating highways around these racially zoned areas was another way to prevent integration and create physical barriers between communities of color and white neighborhoods. In the present day, just factually speaking, Boston is still a majority minority city, and these communities that you see were red are still areas where most communities of color and immigrants currently live. And Boston is the 11th most segregated city in the country. And I think that speaks to, how folks kind of get boxed in based on where they're able to live. So folks end up marginalized by urban segregation in US cities like Boston. And these communities, like we said already, are located near freight centers and heavily traveled roadways and can lack access to or struggle to obtain the resources to adapt to or move away from air pollution, diesel pollution, and other climate-related harms. These same communities also experience systemic inequities, meaning that they're facing higher rates of asthma, diabetes, heart disease. So pollution makes existing health problems worse. And also due to these structural inequities, in addition to the air pollution and diesel pollution, we have an older housing stock here in Boston that contributes to respiratory issues. Folks have lower wealth and income. We have a stark racial wealth gap here in Massachusetts. That's the work that my organization tries to address. We have food deserts and food swamps and food apartheid. Please look up those terms if they're newer to you. We have less access to quality medical care. If you are a person of color living in Boston, and that might be surprising to folks, like, no, we have the best hospitals. Doesn't mean all the folks who live here, communities of color and immigrants, are able to access that level of care. And folks are dealing with toxic and chronic stress that has an impact on the body. These communities often have less green space, less tree cover, fewer recreational spaces, and less built environment, and there are safety considerations there as well. So to kind of wrap up this piece of me nerding out about the social determinants of health, the result is a life expectancy gap. So in Boston, some neighborhoods of color have lifespans 20 to 30 years shorter than the wealthier, whiter neighborhoods. And there's a whole example about Mass Ave, one side of Mass Ave. Folks are living 30 years longer on the Back Bay side than on the Roxbury side and further down. And vehicle pollution is a part of that story. I would even argue a major part that often gets overlooked. Last slide. So these are just some headlines. Feel welcome to kind of skim at them while I read. They're all from the last couple of years. And I'm going to read a quote from a study real quick and then kind of close this out because I'm coming up on my time. Analysis of the emission from cars, SUVs, trucks, and buses show that exposure to harmful particulate matter air pollution is inequitable. And this is a United States study. So Asian Americans are on average exposed to 34% higher PM 2.5 concentrations than the average person in the US. Black people experience concentrations 24% higher than average. Latinos have 23% higher exposure than the US population as a whole. White people have average exposure that's 14% lower than average for the nation. That means on average, Asian Americans and Black people are exposed to PM 2.5 pollution that's 56 and 44% higher, respectively, than white people. So electrification is not just about cleaner technology, it's about health and it's about justice. EVs, as we know, don't have like tailpipe emissions, meaning immediate improvements in neighborhood air quality, where people live, where they work, where they play, where they worship, where they go to school. By reducing exposure to the most overburdened communities, electrification can help to close life expectancy gaps, health gaps, prevent hospitalizations, and overall just extend folks' lives. They could live long and healthy. More must be done to increase access to EVs and access to charging stations to ensure that this doesn't only benefit whiter and wealthier communities. So in short, and to kind of wrap this up, transitioning away from gas and diesel is one of the most direct ways to improve public health and to address inequities. Thank you.
Thank you. That was an awesome whirlwind tour through all this history. It's a lot of history to summarize, so thank you. I will move now, if my slides cooperate, into shifting from looking at the past to the future to see what this can all look like if we manage this transition as quickly as we'd like. I will take just a couple slides to do a quick comparison about EVs versus gas and diesel vehicles, because I hear a lot of confusion on this point. And to be fair, before we dove into this, didn't know a whole lot about this either. Often you hear, okay, an electric vehicle doesn't have a tailpipe, but what about brakes? What about tire wear? What about all that? So as Dr. Cohen mentioned earlier, there's lots of different pollutants that come out of internal combustion engines that harm human health. We're looking at particulate matter specifically for just a couple slides here because it is one of the biggest offenders. And so when you're thinking about vehicle pollution, there are two sources of particulate matter from vehicles. One is the exhaust pipe, so the actual combustion, the burning of the things. And then the other is non-exhaust. So that is mostly tire wear and brake wear, the actual friction of brakes rubbing against the wheel to slow it down, little particles peel off, and the same happens with tires on the road. EVs have no exhaust pipes, or pure battery electric vehicles have no exhaust pipes, so they don't have any exhaust particulate matter emissions. But for non-exhaust emissions, it does get more complicated. So electric vehicles in general are heavier than equivalent gas-powered cars, and so you can expect more particulate matter from tire and brake wear as a result. But at the same time, electric vehicles use regenerative braking, which is a method of braking that doesn't rely on friction. And so there's a lot less brake wear in electric vehicles. And so the question is, how do these things balance out? We found a study or a report from 2020 from the OECD that tabulates all the PM emission sources by vehicle type. So you've got, the report has a lot of data. We put it into these graphs at the bottom, and I'm going to try and explain them in a way that makes sense because there's a lot on these slides. But basically on the left, we've got PM 2.5. On the right, we've got PM 10. Everything that is blue is non-exhaust emissions, and everything that is orange is exhaust emissions. So I'm going to start on the very furthest left to walk through one example here. So PC stands for passenger car, SUV is an SUV, and then LCV is a light commercial vehicle. And then what this report did was look at, for each of those categories of vehicles, it looked at diesel vehicles, gas vehicles, and then two types of battery electric vehicles, or BEVs, one with a range of 100 kilometers and one with a range of 300 kilometers. And so you can see here that for the passenger vehicles, the low end of the estimate, the diesel and gas emissions of particulate matter are higher than the battery electric that gets 100 miles and the battery electric that gets 300 miles. And for every single category of vehicle and for every single type of emission, when you add the exhaust and non-exhaust emissions of the gas or diesel vehicle, they are always higher than the non-exhaust emissions of the battery electric vehicle. So this is a slide for the nerds. If you want to dive into this, we've got a whole blog post that picks this apart. But the story here is that the fact that the vehicles don't have an exhaust pipe and use regenerative braking overcomes the fact that they're heavier and might therefore otherwise create more particulate matter. This is shown in this study, but also borne out by two recent real-world studies that we like to point to. One is by the Keck School of Medicine over in California that compared real-life EV registration data, air quality data. They looked at nitrogen oxides instead of particulate matter, and asthma-related ER visits in California between 2013 and 2019. And they adjusted for other factors to pull out the trend. But what they showed was as EV adoption increases, asthma-related emergency room visits drop. So that's really exciting to see that real-world data. And then very recently, EIT Urban Mobility, which is affiliated with the European Union, released a study just this summer that found that in the major cities they studied, the increase in electric vehicles reduced particulate matter by over 80%. So these are really exciting real-world, real-life stories that I think set us up well for the next slides, which are from Dan to talk about, okay, let's model this out. If we go electric, what does that actually mean in the future? So Dan, take it away.
Thank you. Before I jump in, I saw Caroline put in the chat. Did you want to answer that question before I jump into my slides?
I think let's do your slides and then
we'll come back.
Let's go back.
Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. Once again, my name is Dan Fitzgerald. I oversee our advocacy and public policy work for in Rhode Island and Massachusetts for the American Lung Association. Ultimately, all of our work is working to create a world free of lung disease. So we really put our mission into kind of four main areas: defeating lung cancer and other lung diseases, creating a tobacco-free future, access to quality and affordable healthcare. And what I'll be talking about today is some of our work in the Champion Healthy Air for All, and really building off of exactly what Dr. Cohen and what Alyssa talked about. I wanted to share a little bit about some of our recent research reports that hopefully could be a tool for you all in all of our collective advocacy of moving this important work forward. So on the next slide, I want to quickly talk about our the State of the Air report. This 2025 data came out. This is our 26th annual State of the Air report, and ultimately it is looking at unhealthy levels of air pollution for ground level ozone and both short-term and long-term particle pollution. So I won't go too deep into this, as a lot of this we kind of just talked about, a lot of the information that Alyssa shared about, and as well as the public health or health impact that Dr. Cohen did. But I did want to share that this is a great tool. We put this report out every April. You can look at this both at a county or a state level and also at a metropolitan level. I highlighted just some quick data there at the bottom from the Boston, Worcester, Providence metropolitan area that actually found that our metro area was ranked 61st worst for high ozone days. And there's a tremendous amount of data as a part of this. The report can be a great way to, ultimately dive into data at that higher level, but also can be used as a tool to talk about and looking at the impact from things like ozone. We talk about that as a sunburn of the lungs. We can look at really to what Alyssa was talking about, of thinking we see some of the highest rates of asthma in areas close to same what she was talking about in Boston, in Providence, between the Port of Providence and the 95 corridor. So looking at a lot of that data to help fuel the work that we do. But the main reports I wanted to talk about today, on the next slide, we have 4 individual reports that all kind of work together, looking at the public health impact of zero emission vehicles powered by renewable energy. So our newest one in this category of research reports is called Boosting Health for Children. It's looking at specifically the pediatric impact of zero emission transportation. We have one that's very specific to, it's called Driving to Clean Air. So looking at the health benefits of zero emission cars specifically. We have one that is on trucks and transportation in outside of kind of the residential transportation space. And then our culmination that I'll talk a little bit more about that is our zeroing in on healthy air report that looks at the health and climate benefits of zero emission vehicles, and what that could look like over time. So on the next slide, I'll share just a little bit about that report here. The zeroing in on healthy air report that looks at a rapid transition to zero emission transportation powered by renewable energy would result by 2050 in $1.2 trillion in public health benefits. That's trillion with a T. This is a very long report that I'm only going to really touch the really high levels of. So I have the link towards the end of my slides, and I would love for you to dive into it and hopefully use this as a tool, but really looking at this as a way to achieve major benefits to our health and our climate. And then on the next slide, I wanted to quickly talk about some of the impacts that this report found here in our metro area in the Boston Providence area. We were actually on the top 25 lists of the cities that would, or metro areas that would have the biggest public health benefit from this rapid transition to zero emission vehicles for many of the reasons that Alyssa talked about, of looking at and you can see some more of this in our State of the Air report, but we know that this burden is not shared equally. And we found that because of that, we see a lot of this bigger impact in our Boston and Providence area. So more specifically, the cumulative public health benefit for this transition by 2050 would be about $22.7 billion. We could also avoid over 2,000 premature deaths, 43,000 asthma attacks avoided, and over 230,000 work lost days avoided as well. So we know that to do this is a culmination of health and climate and residents working together on our advocacy. So we hope that these tools can be a helpful way for folks to use this data to talk about this from a health perspective, in addition to the great work that you all are already doing. And on my last slide here, before we jump into questions, I just wanted to share that you can find this at lung.org/EV, or if you're interested in our State of the Air report, lung.org/SOTA. If there is ways that we can help utilize this data or package it in a different way that would help in your own advocacy, please reach out. My email's right there. And if you're ever interested in hearing from the Lung Association on our advocacy in Rhode Island and Mass or across the nation, you can join our Lung Action Network. You can simply text LAN to 34727, and you'll hear from us and be engaged in our advocacy. But yeah, thank you so much for having me, and hopefully these research reports can be helpful for you moving forward.
Well, thank you. I'm going to transition us to a discussion. I know we've got a couple questions already. I will say to everybody on the webinar, please submit your questions. We definitely want to get to them all. You can do that with the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen. But if you'd like to contact any of us after the webinar individually, you can do that there, and we'll send out those emails in the follow-up email as well. So for now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen just so that we can all see each other and get to some of these questions. One question, which is a good one that we get a lot, which any of you are welcome to answer, is what about the harmful battery manufacturing process for EVs? Do any of you want to comment on that?
I can talk if you want.
Yeah, please.
So I think there are There are a couple things. First of all, the manufacture of batteries requires a lot of energy up front, as well as a lot of water. That's true also of all the AI stuff that's going on now. A lot of water is required for cooling. In this case, the water is used for extraction and purification of the minerals. The total amount of energy required, or greenhouse gas emission, or however you want to measure it, over the life of a car, there's more upfront with the manufacturing, EV compared to gas, and then a lot less over the life of the car. So the total amount is greater with a gas car. I think that the biggest concern is the water use, and then all of the safety, child labor concerns about mining in a lot of countries where cobalt and lithium are being mined. I think cobalt is mostly in DRC, in Democratic Republic of Congo, and there are concerns about the safety, exposure to toxins, slave labor, child labor. So I think those things are definite concerns. I don't want to minimize those at all. I think, the other thing about batteries, though, is that they're more effectively being recycled, and the minerals are purified and reused. So definite concerns. In terms of the energy calculation, though, I think it's pretty clear that EVs use less. Again, you have to assume that the grid is going to be more and more electrified as time goes on. I think many people see that that's kind of an inevitable thing that's going to need to happen for us to reduce emissions. But if you account for that, the overall amount of emissions that are used would definitely be less with the electric car.
Alyssa or Dan, do you want to add anything to that? I'll add one thing, which is often when people ask us about the battery manufacturing process, they're asking from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective. From a public health perspective, I will say that where we have kind of landed is that I don't know of any mining or industrial process anywhere in the world that does not have social or environmental impacts that are negative. I think what is clear in a fossil fuel-based economy is that we have to continually pull fossil fuels out of the ground forever. Whereas with the vision that the American Lung Association's reports build out of an electrified future running on renewable energy, there's some amount of mining, but then that recycling piece kicks in and you don't have to keep pulling stuff out of the earth. At the same scale. There's been some interesting studies that I can also share of just the sheer amount of tonnage of stuff that we have to pull out of the ground in a fossil fuel-based economy is so much more than one that's based on renewable energy. So I want to second what Dr. Cohen said about there are concerns there that absolutely need to be addressed, for sure. Go ahead, Alyssa.
That did spark a thought that I have. So for those of you who have a little bit of a public health understanding, you might have heard of the social determinants of health, and there's the areas where we live, work, and play, and how that has an impact on our health. We're thinking about access to food, access to healthcare, jobs, employment, et cetera, et cetera. There's something that's a newer term that was coined, I believe, 2022, 2023, formally here in the United States. It's something that's been used globally now for several years, and it's called the commercial determinants of health. And it's how businesses and corporations, especially multinational corporations, have an ability to positively or negatively impact our health, us being society, people. And so we think about the social and environmental impacts of things like mining and those concerns, which are very real and very present. We have to think about these corporations as actors, and how can we influence actors and politicians and heads of state to do things that will positively impact people's health versus negatively. So there are social determinants of health at play, political determinants of health at play. There's also commercial determinants of health, and how do we, like I said, influence and address the actions of corporations and try to change those to better the health of the people who are doing work in other places, as well as the health of people who are trying to be recipients of those things, like us buying EVs.
There's a comment from an EV driver here that I appreciate, which is just a reminder to folks who have EVs, is that the brake and tire particulates are pretty under the control of the EV driver. If you don't slam on the brakes and slam on the accelerator all the time, you will produce fewer particulates and other emissions than if you drive really aggressively. So thank you, Jim, for that reminder. I have one question. There's two more questions for now. One is do you have any information about the air pollution levels generated by gas stations? And I'm wondering if Dr. Cohen or Dan or Alyssa, do any of you have knowledge there? Because I actually don't. I imagine it's not good, but please enlighten us.
I can jump in. I can definitely follow up with some more specific. I don't have the exact data in front of me, but I do know that gas stations certainly contribute to air pollution and pollutants like volatile organic compounds. So that we have some research around that. But I think it also just gets back to what Alyssa was talking about as we look at the burden is not shared equally, and as we look at the composition of neighborhoods and where pollutants come from, both from gas stations here, but also from other sources of pollution to the ports and the highways that we've talked about. All of those absolutely contribute to, and one of the things we talk about here at the Lung Association, one of the leading indicators of health is the very zip code you live in. And that would certainly makes an impact. But happy to try to find I can see if I can do it while we're still on. See if I can find something.
I just looked a little bit as well, and it looks like benzene, which is a carcinogen that is in the air around gas stations, is associated with an increased risk of pediatric leukemia. So I think that would be one. But then all the VOCs, all the volatile organic compounds, have a lot of health impacts and known health impacts. Yeah.
Another sort of sciencey question here is, we sort of talked about gas and diesel in one breath for most of this webinar, but they are very different. So the question is specifically about kids sitting on a school bus, which I know there's been a big campaign to electrify school buses for a long time. But could you respond to the kids sitting on a school bus and also diesel versus gasoline? Any of you?
Well, I mean, I will have to do a little looking up at the same time. My understanding is that diesel's is worse. I mean, also just it's usually the smell is more potent, and that usually is a sign that there are more volatile organic compounds. Just in doing a quick search, it looks like both particulate matter that are very small, ultra fine, and nitrogen oxides are higher. So definitely, I think exposure to diesel is worse. I think the question is there anything else you can do to prevent kids from being exposed to it? And I mean, and again, I'm absolutely not an expert in this area, but I think idling, people talk a lot about just having trucks idling in a location, or a lot of people leave their cars running or bus, and then that is definitely really problematic, and I think in most cases not necessary unless you're in a really cold day or other things. And of course, EVs can heat, or electric, can heat the vehicle without resorting to having anything combusting, which is a nice feature. The other thing I don't know anything about is whether there's been any attempt to, have what the filtration is on school buses, but that would be a cheaper and shorter term solution if that's not already being done. I mean, most of the time the windows are not open in the Northeast, I would imagine anyways. So
I will say the Union of Concerned Scientists, I think it is, did a study a couple of years ago looking at relative emissions from different types of vehicles, and they found that vehicles from class 2B to class 8, so basically everything from like a transit van up to a one of those combo trucks, basically, make up 6% of the vehicles on the road in southern New England. And most of these run on diesel, but they're responsible for 48% of the nitrogen emissions and 41% of the particulate matter emissions from the transportation sector. So diesel-powered vehicles do absolutely disproportionately cause this type of pollution, which is why ports in particular are such a big center for this kind of pollution, because you've got both the ships coming in and the heavy-duty trucks coming in, and they're all running on diesel. I'll also say on the school bus front that there's a lot of work that's been done. The World Resources Institute has had a campaign on electric school buses for a long time. And it is frightening how many of those particulates seep into the buses when when those buses are idling or driving, and there's data showing impact on that in terms of the kids' cognition when they get to school. So those diesel's bad. This is my long story short answer.
Can I circle back to the question that was asked previously?
Absolutely.
Because I was still thinking about it as it relates to like the gas station thing. And I'm very worried about gas stations. I don't have that data in front of me, but what worries me more is living close to mechanic shops and like auto body shops because of oil and gas and runoff and the materials from those places. There's not only fumes, but it also gets into soil. And that soil, kids play in soil, it travels, it goes in rainwater, it goes down the street. And so that could just be another thing to be concerned about as it relates to, you know, when you have a gas vehicle versus like oil vehicles. Electric vehicles don't necessarily need oil changes, gas, things of that nature that required related to combustion.
The questions are coming in, so I'm gonna.
I can take a stab at if you guys want at the next one.
Yeah, go for it.
So EV charging stations.
Wait, first say what the question is.
Yeah. Are the health impacts of EV charging stations known? I think they're pretty. Again, I'm looking things up on the fly because I don't know the answer. The electric vehicle charging stations use DC current, and there is a very if you've been to them or not been to them, I'm not even sure there's a really, the noise is not significant at all. That is one theoretical concern. Again, a lot less probably than being, than gas cars and so forth. And the cooling fans that are used for the DC current can resuspend particulate matter, but don't generate particulate matter. So if it's settling down, it can sort of send it back into the air. And then, you know, there's a lot of controversy about electromagnetic fields in general. However, from a medical perspective, DC current does not generate, it generates a 0 hertz field, which is not a field that does anything. So even there's a lot of controversy about electromagnetic fields and if they do anything negative. And I think there's any solid evidence on that. But DC fields literally do not generate any frequencies. So they don't probably have any health impact.
Thank you. I also saw there's a couple studies that came out, or it's really one study that's been reported on about PM levels at DC fast charging stations in California. And that was exactly that issue. Basically, there's the fans resuspending some of the particulates. You touched on noise very briefly, but somebody actually asked if anybody's commented on the effects of noise pollution and public health benefits on that front.
I would only say that when I bring my kids to a trampoline park after like an hour, like I'm very overstimulated and unhappy. So, and I think, you know, people can comment on what's their experience of being deep in a forest when there's no noise and how they feel. Definitely, I think being exposed to noise chronically. I haven't done any research at the moment about this, but can make you feel chronically stressed. Like living in a city in a lot of ways can, and that absolutely has negative health impacts. Yeah.
And this is not from the Lung Association perspective, but I know our partners at the American Public Health Association have some great information about noise as a public health hazard. So I know they have some great stuff. I'm not sure about in Massachusetts. I know there's some local orgs in Rhode Island who are doing some cool work about mapping out noise, and others mapping out smell. So all these other aspects of related there, but definitely check out the Public Health Association. Some great stuff.
I just want to second and third that noise leading to chronic stress, and that contributes to chronic illness, as many things do, but noise is harmful. I believe it also impacts learning. Not my area of expertise per se, but I've heard it impacts, heard in a public health way, not like I heard on the street, that it also impacts learning especially for young kids.
That makes a lot of sense. We have one question about whether electrifying passenger vehicles or public transit vehicles has a greater impact on reducing PM emissions. I have a way that I'd respond to that, but I definitely want to hear from you guys first.
Oh, Dan, go ahead.
I was gonna say I could not find the mute button. Sorry about that. It's all kind of compiled up into the zeroing in on healthy air report that I talked about. But we do have a separate report on the passenger vehicles versus public and trucking. So what we found in the trucking report, they're pretty comparable, but it was slightly higher for the passenger car area is where we saw a larger benefit in those kind of four metrics. In the public health benefits from like a fiscal component, avoided premature deaths, asthma attacks, and lost work days. But yeah, interested in how others would respond too.
I definitely think electrifying public buses would be huge. Yeah. And subway for that matter. To the advantage of some buses in already, right, run on electric lines in Boston. Yeah. Yeah, just because you're first of all, you're immediately targeting urban noise and environmental pollution. And you're think about in theory how many cars these people would be driving. Of course, Americans on the other side of it, are we going to get there without targeting cars? Probably not, because most Americans don't take public transportation. So I would say it kind of needs to be a dual effort. But I do think cities could do a lot.
Electrification would definitely help. And electrification is one of BECMA's, underneath our clean energy environmental justice bucket, one of our top priorities. Part of the commuter rail in Boston has also been electrified. Electrified the Fairmont line, or the Purple Line.
It's in the process of being electrified.
In the process of being electrified. I went to the little ceremony thing. So in my mind, it already happened, but you're right, it did not. So that's just something I think folks from an advocacy perspective will continue to fight for, is as much as can be electrified. Let's do it.
And then I'd say keep the questions coming, but there's one here that I think is a nice like rounding us out question, which is, what do successful policies to promote EV adoption look like to you? What is important to consider or include?
I'm happy to jump in here. I mean, I think the work that we're doing is multi-pronged here, but ultimately, obviously, going in anything to get us in the direction of that future that we were just talking about, both from the rapid transition to zero emission vehicles, and that's multi-pronged, right? Making sure that is not cost prohibited, making sure that is something that can be equitably rolled out and beneficial for all, especially looking at the disproportionate burden of who's taking on the most health harms from emissions, but also on the renewable energy front. So that a lot of our policy areas are kind of in both areas there of looking at ways to boost up renewable energy, but also make sure that we're eliminating root causes of environmental injustices, and that looks a lot of different ways. I know we were talking a lot about electric buses just a moment ago. We have a tremendous amount of resources, policy tools and videos and things in that way too, if there's folks working in that area that we could help with as well.
I think it has to be, I think people will make the change when it's for selfish reasons, unfortunately. I think economic incentives, and I think it has to really be it has to be obvious that electric vehicles are cheaper in the long term, and maybe even upfront too, although I don't think that's going to be the case probably for a long time or at all. And I think gas, probably when gas prices are, or if and when they're much higher, I think that that'll be more motivating for people too. And then I think we all have to agree that this is a problem in the first place, and that's not the case either. So but I think economic incentives really have to be the biggest thing. I have 2 electric cars, but before that I was happily driving like a Honda Civic, which is, very efficient, but I didn't get the electric cars for financial reasons. I did it because I, felt very strongly about it. So, and not everyone has that luxury.
I would say, in addition to what's been said, because I agree with both Dan and Dr. Cullen, I think about, where can government try to influence buyer behavior? It could be through economic persuasion. It also could be around leading the charge, like electrifying public fleets. And when there's public procurement opportunities, going with an electric option, I do think they have the ability to influence the industry and several industries towards electrification, and that might also influence consumers. So, on a completely non-public health note, I also think we have to make it cool. Because a lot of things, if they're not cool, people just don't buy in. And cool is subjective, but sometimes we got to make things cool.
That. I'll say
I was going to say that must be an electric motorcycle that makes a really, really loud noise when you is that the only solution to cool? I don't know.
I don't know. We got to keep figuring out the cool factor.
We got to get some biker gangs interested.
Oh, they're out there. Believe me, they come to our EV events.
Okay.
I'll just say that I think with EVs and policy, the challenge is balancing the move forward as fast as possible and make sure that the benefits are distributed equitably. So if you've got a pot of money, how much of it goes towards general incentives to go electric or increased incentives for low-income families? So that's always the conversation to be had. I think we as Green Energy Consumers Alliance are focusing on purchase incentives, yes, but also the build out of charging infrastructure and electric rates and how those are set, because there's a lot that can be done to make the economic case a little better or the convenience case a little better. That doesn't necessarily mean a direct purchase incentive, which with the loss of the federal tax credit is a harder case to make right now. We've got 5 minutes left, and there's one question. Somebody asked if you could speak more on the concentration of particulate matter along major transportation routes, considering we see less people of color in suburbs, but they are still connected to cities with highways. I'm not sure, Alyssa, if I think I read that weirdly. Did the question make sense to you? Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, the question makes sense to me. I think it's more, I grew up in Peabody, which is near a highway, but also is a suburb. And when we think about the location of the highway and the distance between the highway and where residential homes are, it's much further apart than when we're in major cities and stacked on top of each other. I think about density in communities and suburbs, they're just less dense. We have a lot more standing single family homes with plenty of land, much more trees, and just more distance from major highways. And then when we live in cities, we have multifamily housing, triple deckers, just the density is so much higher and we're so much closer to these truck routes that I do think the impact is a little bit different. I'd be curious to do more research as it relates to suburbs, potentially, further out in Central and West Mass, and how the level of particulate pollution is impacting suburbs, just given the distance and the density to the truck routes.
I also think trees are might be a big factor too. So if you just have if you have many towns in Massachusetts have pretty big swaths of forest or town parks or town forests and things like that, like the Middlesex Falls. I mean, just huge areas of trees. I'm sure that has a big impact too.
That's a great point. And a lot of suburbs have conservation land or land they've just set aside that can't be developed. Whereas here in cities, we don't have trees. Yes, there are some parks and things the city of Boston in particular tries to do to create green space, but naturally there are fewer trees, which also leads to hotter climates and other health issues, a whole separate conversation.
Yep.
And so, like I said, trees, density, distance, there's more that can be discussed there, and I would have to really look into that.
Well, I will say thank you very much to both of you. We seem to have lost Dan, but I thank Dan as well. And I thank all of you who've joined us and asked really good questions. There were more questions than we could get to. There are a couple on specifically, we have to clean up our electricity grid as we're doing all this. We could have a whole other webinar on how we're doing that. There's state policies in place in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island that require more renewable energy to be added each year. A bunch of questions about school buses. That's a whole can of worms that we're happy to talk about. That's very complicated, particularly in our region. But because it's almost 1 o'clock, I will return to the slides just again to say, if you do have any follow-up questions, you are welcome to send any of us an email. We'll also send out a recording with the slides and all of our email addresses. And then I am contractually obliged to remind everybody that we are a nonprofit organization, and we want to keep putting on free educational series like this. So if you are so inclined and able, we will always welcome a donation at greenenergyconsumers.org/give, or give now, sorry. But with that, I'll say a big thanks to Alyssa, Dr. Cohen, and Dan, wherever he went. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you all get to go outside and enjoy the lovely weather.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.